Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to your Construction Safety Association of Manitoba's 2023 virtual webinar series. My name is Megan Story, and I am the Training and Development Manager of the Construction Safety Association of Manitoba, and we are proud to be recognized as your premier and trusted source for safety and health information, resources, training, and core certification. Today's virtual webinar is an example of how we are striving to provide you with practical and relevant information to help with accident prevention in your workplace. For those of you who know CSAM, quite simply, our answer is yes. How can we help? We will have the answers to your safety questions, or we will find an answer with the help of our qualified resources and partners in safety and health. Today, I am pleased to introduce Howie, who will introduce and discuss adequate fluid replacement to stay hydrated, role of electrolytes with sweating, and effective hydration strategies while working in hot weather. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel, and a copy of Howie's presentation will also be made available. Howie, the screen is yours. You can share and begin when you're ready.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction, Megan. And again, my name is Howie, and I am the dietitian here at the Wellness Institute. If you're not familiar with what exactly the Wellness is, it's essentially a medical fitness facility. So not only are we a gym that caters to a wide population, we also do a lot of work with folks who have different medical conditions. So we run rehab programs, cardiac, pulmonary, and I myself, I work out of our sport and injury and rehab clinic here at the Wellness. And as mentioned, today I'll be talking to all of you in regards to hydration and safety, especially with the weather we've been having the last couple of days. It's very topical, and certainly more heat is always going to be on its way. So I'm hoping today we'll be able to talk a little bit about how we can utilize fluids and hydration to keep us safe. And I'm hoping all of you will learn something or at least generate some discussion. If you guys can hear and see me okay, if there's any issues, just feel free to let me know in the chat box. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and I'll start puttering along. So just a little bit about myself. As mentioned, I am a dietitian here at the Wellness Institute, and I've been here at the Wellness for about a year and a bit. Before here, I used to work not only in long-term care, but in acute care as well. I've done a lot of work with athletes, particularly those who do compete outdoors, who sweat a lot, who also have concerns with hydration. And certainly through a lot of my clients, some of them are construction workers or laborers outside. So I've had a lot of discussion around, keeping them safe, keeping them hydrated during strenuous work, especially when it comes to hot weather. And just as a side note, even though I'm a dietitian, I certainly do love Oreos, and I am of the mindset that all foods can fit. Not sponsored by Oreos at all, though perhaps one day that'll be my crowning achievement. But in terms of what we're going to be covering today, we're just going to be looking at water and how it can affect our health, just some of the basics. We'll also look at the relationship between the effect of heat, our body, our health, and how fluids can play a role in preventing or mitigating side effects from heat-related illnesses. And also just be talking a little bit about not only the different types of fluids that are available to us, but also our requirements as well. And a really big thing when it comes to staying safe and hydrated is that hydration begins, not only during our hours of work, but even before we step foot onto our work site, into our field, wherever and whenever we're working. Hydration is a 24-hour thing. So I'll be talking a little bit about aspects of that as well. Now, most folks know that water is really important. I mean, it does make up 60% of the human body, and it is integral for keeping our organs functioning. It's integral for digestion, joint health, temperature control, body waste, energy and mental focus. And particularly when we're talking about safety, when working in the heat, that organ function, that temperature control, that energy and mental focus, those are all really key points in order to help support the safety of our workers and the safety of our people. Now, generally speaking, you've probably heard the requirement where most folks need around, 6 to 8 cups of water or fluids in a day. Now, I do want to stress that is a starting point. A lot of clients I work with, they have different ages, sexes, weight, height, activity level, medical histories, and of course, different levels of climate in regards to their working conditions. So while 6 to 8 cups is that starting point, it's certainly not a be all end all. There's a lot of other factors that can increase or even decrease the amount of fluids we need. One thing to note, though, is that if you are someone who is older, you're more active, pregnant, or you do live or work in a hot or humid location, you certainly need more fluid, so close to the 8 cup recommendation, or even more, depending on how frequent and severe these factors are. Even working in the cold can also influence the amount of fluids we need, just like how we can become dehydrated in hot weather or hot temperatures conditions. Working in cold weather can also increase our fluid loss as well. In terms of losing fluids, most individuals tend to lose their fluids through breathing or respiration, sweating, as well as urination or bowel movements. And if you are someone who is working in very hot conditions, then breathing and sweating are going to be the two biggest causes of water loss or fluid loss. No, I typically will always recommend water as the first choice. Water is going to be the best option around for staying hydrated, for staying safe. That being said, water doesn't have to be your only source of hydration. Items like your plain herbal teas, your sport drinks, electrolyte drinks, your low sodium soups, milks, these can also contribute as well. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about the differences between sport drinks and electrolyte drinks, just because there is a few differences, as well as the role of caffeine and coffee as well. I mean, if you're someone who is a habitual coffee drinker, if you're working an early shift, if you just need that extra kick of energy, caffeine is always going to be typically the number one choice for addressing those situations. And caffeine can play a role in, keeping us hydrated, but it can also place us at risk as well. Now, when I talk about electrolytes are essentially, minerals that help maintain our hydration, to help retain our fluids. They're also really important for maintaining our body's nerves and muscle functions. And while there's a lot of different types of electrolytes, the three big ones that are related to retaining fluids is going to be sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And these are all minerals that naturally occur in our foods. So items like bananas, spinach, your dark leafy greens, some salted products like beef jerky, anything that's preserved. These are all different food sources of electrolytes. So while I will sometimes suggest getting our electrolytes through fluids, which again, I'll expand on later on, we can also get them through food as well. And electrolytes are really, really important whenever you are someone who is heavily sweating, you're very active, and if you are working in hot weather for a prolonged period of time, so at least more than a couple of hours. Electrolytes are also very important if you have someone who is contending or dealing with vomiting or diarrhea. Diarrhea vomiting can be a side effect when it comes to heat-related illnesses, but also if you have someone who has a bout of foodborne illness, stomach flu, and there is some excess vomiting or diarrhea, that can cause a lot of fluid loss. So getting those electrolytes as an extra support in maintaining our fluids and staying hydrated can be very important. So in these situations, with the hot weather, the heavy sweating, water and electrolytes can provide better hydration over the long term. And some examples of these electrolyte drinks or these sport drinks are going to be your Pedialyte, your Hydrate, your Gatorade. Now, the difference between electrolyte and sport drinks is really going to come down to the amount of sugars or carbohydrates they have. So our items like our Pedialyte and our Hydrate, they only have electrolytes in there. So they only have the sodium, the potassium, magnesium. So they're going to be really good for hydration. Items like our Gatorade or our Powerade will also have sugar in them as well. And that sugar can help with the hydration, but a key point of these sport drinks is that not only do they provide electrolytes, they also provide energy as well. So if you've got someone who is very active, maybe they've got a sensitive stomach, they can't eat as much, they can't tolerate solid food, or they're just not in the mood. Gatorade can not only help with staying hydrated, it can also help provide energy as well. So just depending on the circumstance, all of these options are okay. You can also make your own sport drink as well, and I'll touch on that later down or later on during this presentation. Now, I've talked a little bit about our fluid requirements. I've talked about electrolytes. Now I want to spend some time talking about the effect of heat on our health. And at least looking at it from a nutrition or fluid standpoint, the big thing we look at, of course, is dehydration. So dehydration can occur in hot weather, and we're at a higher risk because of it due to the heat and, by relation, the sweating. So in the heat, our temperature rises, we have to exert ourselves more, we're sweating more, and that can lead to dehydration. And as we sweat and as we get dehydrated, particularly through heavy sweating, heat exhaustion can occur. And signs and symptoms of heat exhaustion can include, but are not limited to, dizziness, headaches, weakness, excess sweating, very fast heart rate, and nausea and vomiting. So whenever you have someone who has been, working for a longer period of time, it's very hot, they're sweating quite a bit, we want to make sure that we watch out for these signs because they can be indicators that heat exhaustion is either beginning to set in or is starting to occur, especially if this individual either hasn't really been staying hydrated or drinking, or they haven't been drinking enough. And I'll talk a little bit about hydration rates again later on in this presentation. And heat exhaustion over time can affect our bodies. So if you remember earlier on in the presentation, I talked about how fluids can impact our digestion, it can impact our focus and our organs. Well, chronic heat exhaustion can affect our kidneys, it can affect our stomach health, and it can affect our mental health as well. So our focus, our mood, our clarity. And in very serious cases, heat exhaustion can then turn into heat stroke, which can be fatal. And the risk for organ damage and death is quite high. So making sure that we stay hydrated when working in hot temperatures for long periods of time is imperative, not only for overall health, but also just for reducing any kind of long-term negative impacts, as well as preventing any kind of fatality. And you know what, I've seen this, not heat stroke per se, but I have seen heat exhaustion not only in some of the construction workers I worked with, and a lot of the athletes I work with too. So rugby players playing outside for long periods of time. My wife, she works construction as well. She works in HR. So, she's heard of issues on sites where, folks have struggled with managing their health when, heat waves like the ones we've experienced have swept our city or have swept our province. So making sure that we stay safe in the heat, especially our working, is going to be very important. Now, heat-related illnesses can be caused by a variety of different factors. Some are going to be job and environment-based. Others will be personal. So from an environment standpoint, the ones that I look at least when it comes to hydration, is your hot temperature, especially your high humidity. Of course, as it gets more humid, our ability to sweat and to have that sweat evaporate gets impacted or decreased, resulting in impaired temperature control. Certainly high physical demand, type of clothing we're wearing. In terms of personal factors, I've touched on this already, but medication, existing health concerns, previous incidences of health-related illnesses is also something to consider as well. Dehydration. And one thing I do want to highlight is how acclimatized a worker is. A lot of the cases I've worked with is also just looking at literature or guidelines shows that individuals who are not used to working in the heat, of course, are going to be at a higher risk of developing heat-related illnesses versus those who have worked in heat for a long period of time. Eventually, the body does adapt. It gets more efficient with managing its internal body temperature, and it gets more efficient with managing its sweat rate as well. So if you've got someone who is not used to working in the heat, getting them to ease themselves in more gradually would be a recommendation I would have, just to make sure that the body can adapt. Of course, it's always going to be difficult if our weather does fluctuate. Living here in Winnipeg, I don't think we're strangers to how our weather can fluctuate both on a hot and a cold level, but just something to keep in mind in regards to personal factors in regards to the heat-related illness. Now, when it comes to preventing heat-related illnesses, it all starts, well before we step foot into our work site. it can start before we even begin work. So we want to make sure that our workers, our individuals, our athletes, clients, whomever we're working with, are hydrated before coming into work. Starting work dehydrated can be very dangerous, especially in hot weather. A lot of my work with athletes, with clients, shows that if you're starting your activity or your work dehydrated, trying to catch up is very difficult, especially when the weather is quite hot and your sweat rate is higher. So you want to make sure that you're hydrated well before you begin to work, because trying to, again, catch up and, get rehydrated when you've already begun work is going to be difficult. Again, especially at that hot weather. Now, some folks will go in accordance to their thirst to figure out whether or not they're hydrated. That is one option to consider, but a lot of individuals, they're often already dehydrated by the time their thirst kicks in. So what I tell my clients is to check the color of your urine. The color of your urine can indicate how hydrated you are. So if we look at this picture here, we want to make sure that the color of our urine about an hour to two before work is going to be a light yellow to maybe a slightly darker pale yellow. So around this green hydrated area, or even that first step of mildly dehydrated. And if you have someone who is around this orange or red zone, about an hour to two out, we want to make sure that they are drinking water. So drinking about a cup to 2 cups within that hour can help bump up their hydration. And again, reduce that risk of dehydration going into work, and therefore that heat illness as well. So again, making sure you're hydrated before coming into work, and also making sure you check the color of urine, because that's going to be the best way for us to figure out whether or not we are hydrated and if we need to drink water. So that's before work. Another thing we want to consider is we want to be mindful of the alcohol intake we have before going into work. Having alcohol 24 hours before our shift can impact our hydration levels. I've seen it with athletes, especially my college athletes, those who are looking to unwind or maybe a little bit more lax in the off season. However, alcohol, 24 hours before our shift can impact our hydration rates. It can be more difficult to stay hydrated. And again, it doesn't have to be water. It can be, plain teas, it can be low sodium soups. These are all viable options. Doesn't have to be just water, but water again would be my first choice. Now, looking at during work, you want to make sure that, again, you are drinking before you are thirsty. Again, most folks, when they're thirsty, it means they're already dehydrated. And when you are working during hot weather, so typically anything above that 27, 28 degrees Celsius, though depends on your worker or your athlete and the tolerance. Generally speaking, if you are working during hotter weather, you want to drink about a cup of fluid every 15 to 20 minutes. There is going to be a limit as to how much the body can absorb in one go in regards to fluids. So small, frequent hydration is going to be a lot more effective than trying to drink a large volume at once. Typically, the body or the stomach can only absorb around a liter, maybe 2 liters within that hour. So trying to drink it all in one go may not be effective. So that's why we do suggest drinking smaller amounts more frequently. So making sure that your water is accessible, if it can be cold, if it's handy. These are all strategies to ensure that water is available. Because a big thing I find with my clients who work, labor-intensive jobs, or my athletes, a barrier for them and why they don't drink as often is because fluid isn't as readily available, or it's not, kind of within their mind. So making sure that it's both physically and mentally accessible, being mindful that you have water, physically that's available. And that can help support the small, frequent hydration, which again will be more effective. Cold fluids can also be a lot more beneficial too, just from a temperature standpoint. So making sure that, or having cold fluids can help with, lowering that body temperature. And earlier I talked about electrolytes. Now, water for most folks will be sufficient, but it's always going to be a little bit subjective depending on a person's sweat rate, their background, their history. So if you have someone who sweats quite a bit, or they are prone to heat-related illnesses, they are prone to dehydration, making sure they drink frequently and trying to get more of those electrolyte drinks can be an extra step or benefit to preventing those heat-related illnesses. So yeah, basically, if you are someone who has a history of heat illness, you're a heavy sweater, you're more physically active, you're someone who's older, or you're working over a longer shift, especially if you're not used to that heat, so you're unacclimatized, then electrolyte drinks can be part of your hydration routine. So again, your Pedialyte, your Hydrolyte, you can make your own electrolyte drink as well. So a very common example I give is going to be, 1 cup water, 1 cup, orange juice or juice of choice for the sugar, and then a pinch of salt. And that for a lot of folks, that's a way for them to incorporate a sport or electrolyte drink while being able to customize the flavors. I do have some clients who are not a big fan of the commercial items just because of the flavoring, it's a little bit too strong for them. So that is an option there. Otherwise, you can get salt from your meals or your snacks. So making sure that they're, regular snacks or lunches being taken, deli meats, jerkies, pretzels, crackers, these are all sources of salt. They can emphasize if you have someone who is sweating quite a bit and working in a hot environment. Now, in regards to caffeine usage, some caffeine is fine. A cup of coffee, some caffeinated tea, that's all right. But we don't want to overdo the caffeine. So nothing more than, 3, maybe 4 cups of coffee, depending on how tall or large a person is. Excess caffeine intake can place a burden on the heart. It can increase our heart rate, which combined with the heat can place an extra burden. Remember that excess heat can potentially increase our heart rate. So we combine that with the heart rate raising effects of caffeine, you get a bit of a double whammy effect. So we want to make sure that, we're not chugging 3 or 4 energy drinks in one go. I'm not anti-caffeine. I partake in caffeine quite a bit myself, but just being mindful of the impacts it can have on the heart, especially when combined with that heat. And then, as I've mentioned again, drinking alcohol within 24 hours of working in hot weather can increase our risk of heat illness. It can impact our ability to stay hydrated. It can impact our temperature control. So just being mindful of any alcohol intake because that can impact our hydration levels and therefore our susceptibility or risk for heat-related illnesses, in hot weather. Now, work towards preventing heat illness also continues after work as well. So a lot of folks will still need fluids after finishing work because your body is still in a state of, higher temperature, it's sweating. So most folks need at least a few hours to drink enough fluids to rehydrate following, your hot weather work. And dehydration is still a real risk even after work is concluded. And chronic dehydration over time can increase the risk for stomach and kidney issues. So it can maybe result in, chronic kidney disease or acute kidney injury. It can cause, diarrhea, can cause GI upset, stomach issues. So I want to make sure that we emphasize to our clients, to our workers, to whomever we're working with, that hydration not only occurs before and during your shift or your activity, but also afterwards as well. So just a really, really important note there. And overall, in regards to hydration, we want to make sure that we stay hydrated before, during, and after work. You can consider electrolyte drinks. Otherwise, you can get sodium from your food or your meals and snacks. And generally speaking, if you are someone who is older, you're a heavy sweater, you have a history of heat-related illnesses, and you are working a longer shift in hot weather, we do recommend drinking some kind of cool fluid. So again, water or electrolyte drink every 15 to 20 minutes, because trying to drink large amounts in one sitting isn't as effective or efficient. And certainly in order to make sure that you are hydrated going into your work, or even at any point in the day, you want to check how hydrated you are, the color of your urine is probably one of the best ways to assess whether or not you need to drink more fluids. So that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover today. Certainly, I believe we'll have some time for questions. But if you do think of any questions after the fact, my contact information is here. So you're more than welcome to send me an email. You can also call our clinic as well in case you ever want to make an appointment. I do work with folks, again, with chronic diseases, gut, liver, do a lot of work with athletes, diabetes, weight loss. The list goes on, just being a dietitian in primary care, and you see a lot of different things. But other than that, I will stop rambling, and I guess I'll open up for some questions. And very long time since I've used Zoom, so I presume you can probably, I guess, put it in the chat box. I'm not sure how you like to do this, Megan. I probably should have clarified that beforehand. That's my fault.
That's okay. Yes, so absolutely put your questions in the chat box for now, and I can help monitor those questions that come up. And yeah, like Howie said, if there are questions that you have beyond today's presentation time, feel free to reach out directly to Howie. His contact information is there. I will also be sending through his PowerPoint presentation in an email this week, along with a link to this recording that will be shared on our YouTube channel. So in both opportunities, you can add your questions that are directly to Howie. But if there are people that have questions, yeah, and we have one here from Doris. If someone has previously had heat stroke, are they more susceptible to it again?
Yeah, so certainly if I have a patient or a client who's had a history of heat stroke, definitely they would be at higher risk. Doesn't mean that if someone has had a heat stroke, they're guaranteed to get it again. Rather, the reason we suggest that they're susceptible to it is because some folks are just, they're not as well acclimatized to the heat. Could be genetic reasons, lifestyle reasons. Nonetheless, if they have had a heat stroke, there's some kind of factor that contributed to that heat stroke. So moving forwards, they would be at an increased risk because of whatever factors caused them to have a heat stroke in the first place. So it could be their age, it could be their diet or hydration, could be genetics, a lack of experience. So certainly if someone has had a heat stroke, being extra mindful as to their safety and how to prevent that would be something I would stress, because they have that history there or some kind of contributing factor.
Another question, you mentioned earlier about making a homemade electrolyte drink. What is used in that?
Really good question. So I know I grazed through it a little bit quickly. So whenever we look at an electrolyte or a sport drink, we can really break it down into 2 to 3 components. One is going to be the fluid. The second one will be your electrolytes, so salt, potassium, magnesium. And then if you're making more of a sport drink approach to give a little extra energy, some kind of sugar or carbohydrate. So if we're going to make our own homemade electrolyte or sport drink, we need our fluid. So I typically recommend water. You're going to need your sugar or carbohydrate. So I typically recommend juice just because that tends to mix the best. Though some folks will use other sugars like honey, for example. And then the third thing would be our electrolytes. So some folks will put in a little bit of salt, like a little salt packet is probably going to be the easiest one. And there's different variations. So the classic one that I recommend is 1 cup water, 1 cup orange juice, and a sprinkle of salt. I've had other folks do 1 cup water and then 1 cup either lime juice or lemon juice or lemonade as well, and a little bit of honey and salt. Really just comes down to personal preference. But again, the key points are going to be your fluid, your electrolyte, and your carbohydrate. So a lot of flexibility there. Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Yeah, and of course, open to any and all questions.
A question I would have is what influence does diet have on hydration? Like, are there better foods to be eating? I know we talked about hydration and liquids and fluids. What about foods that are better to be eaten when we're working in the heat and it's hot outside?
Really, really good question. So, of course, certainly sources of sodium can be help with hydration. Remember that salt can help us retain fluid. So, crackers, beef jerky, salted nuts. Generally speaking, as a dietitian, I try to recommend people eat less salt. However, if you're someone working in hot weather, we actually want to get a little bit more sodium to help maintain the hydration, especially if we're sweating a lot. So any kind of salty foods you can incorporate into your meals or your snacks can be beneficial in regards to hydration. Another thing to consider is going to be any kind of, juicy or fluid based food. So I'm going to give the example of fruit, for example. So your watermelon, your strawberries, your apples, these are all fruits that inherently have fluid in them already, and they can help a little bit with staying hydrated. If you're someone working in cold weather, then soup is also another option to help add a bit of extra fluid while still technically counting as a meal. And then sometimes things like, your yogurts, your puddings, they can have a little bit of fluid to them as well, though not as much. And then, certainly anything with moisture that's been added to it can also help with contributing to your hydration. So yeah, items like fruit, soups, salty items, they can all help with maintaining your hydration outside of your classic, water and electrolyte drinks. Though typically would probably get the most bang for buck with, of course, water.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I know my wife works closely with her safety officer. So like my wife does HR work, and certainly weather's always been something they always try to focus on, especially if it's very hot outside. So with her and her safety officer for their company and therefore their work sites and farm, and they always try to stress that safety aspect. So I really do appreciate the opportunity to be able to share some of my knowledge, what I've learned with the rest of you as well. So thank you, Trish, and everyone for coming on out and for listening to me ramble on.
I know this presentation was focused on beating the heat. Obviously, this is timely going into summer, and we've had a very hot, warm May already, and it looks like that's going to continue on into the end of June for sure. But what about winter months when it's colder, and how important is hydration even in those colder temperatures?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So cold weather, while not necessarily as severe as heat, still presents a challenge for staying hydrated. So just like how we can lose fluids through respiration in hot weather, so breathing, same thing applies in cold weather as well. So I have a lot of cold weather athletes because they are sweating under their gear, which I would anticipate is the same issue for some workers. Between breathing the cold and dry air, it's very easy to become dehydrated. So a lot of the principles I talk about for staying hydrated in the heat, I'd apply very similarly to cold weather with just some slight adjustments. So instead of like cold teas, you go for hot teas, hot soups. Some folks like to have warm water in their bottle as opposed to cold. It'll help, encourage them to drink a little bit more. So certainly the same principles for hot, for beating the heat. I'd also suggest for the cold as well.
Is there any difference in how our bodies absorb regular water versus like a carbonated water, like bubbly?
That's a really good question. So not significantly per se. You can make the argument that some bubbly drinks will have a little bit of salt added to them. Not a lot, but just a little bit to help with flavoring the drink or as part of the carbonation process. So they may help a little bit more with absorbing the fluid. However, for some folks, the carbonation can either be an incentive or a barrier to drinking more. The carbonation can sometimes fill up your stomach so you don't feel as you feel you don't want to drink as much water. So that's more so going to come down to personal preference, I'd imagine. However, from a hydration point of view, they're going to be pretty equivocal outside of a few sticking points. Personally, I will recommend regular water, but if you've got someone or you yourself personally don't like water and you're not, and you won't be encouraged or you won't have incentive to drink it, but you have better success with carbonated water, then something is always going to be better than nothing.
Great, thank you. We'll give everyone a few minutes to think of some other questions that they might have. While you're thinking about those questions, I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to take a look at some upcoming events as well as some additional resources that we have available. So I'm going to stop the sharing of your presentation now, Howie, and I'll put on here our PowerPoint here for everyone to see. So as you can see, we do have an app that hopefully everyone has had an opportunity to download onto their phone, but if you haven't, please do so. It is the CSAM app, and it has all the information that you would look to have for the Act and regulation in our province. In addition to this, if I can keep on showing you, we've got our virtual toolbox talks. So if you're looking for topics for toolbox talks, we do have virtual toolbox talks available for download. And again, they're on our YouTube channel. So take some time to take a look at that if you're looking for information on toolbox talks. We also have an upcoming event next Thursday in Brandon. It's called our Westman Training Blitz and Burritos. There's several courses that we're offering on Thursday next week in Brandon, along with a free food truck lunch. So if you're in and around the Brandon area and looking for some training, next Thursday we will be there. You can scan that QR code on your screen, and that will take you to our training dates page for registration. We have on our website the safety scene. So that is a calendar of events from all around Manitoba on safety. And last but not least, we would love to hear from you. So please scan this QR code to complete a survey of today's presentation and let us know what you think about it, as well as any other suggestions for webinars in the future. So again, we hope to have additional webinars being offered this year. If you have ideas of what you would like us to present on, we would be happy to hear from you and put those on for you later on this year. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. There are no additional questions for Howie, but again, if you did want to reach out to him specifically, feel free to do that, and I will send through his PowerPoint this week as well. You'll be able to see it on YouTube later as well. Thank you, everyone. Have yourself a great day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.